I spent 30 years building my salon from the ground up, sacrificing my own body so my daughter could have the world. But on a packed Saturday morning, she walked in with her arrogant husband, handed me a cardboard box, and told me I was too old to run my own business. They thought they had found the perfect way to take everything I owned by threatening to declare me legally incompetent. What they forgot was who actually owned the building they were trying to steal. My name is Beatrice. I am 62 years old, and for the last 3 decades, my life has been defined by the hum of blow dryers and the scent of hair products. I built Crown and Glory, the most respected black hair salon in my Atlanta community, from a single rented chair into a thriving business. I worked 14-hour days, standing on my feet until my ankles swelled and styling hair until my fingers physically cramped. Every drop of sweat and every skipped meal had one single purpose. I wanted to give my only daughter Kendra the life I never had. I poured all my profits into putting her through a top-tier university. I loved that girl with a fierce, unconditional love, believing that my sacrifices would build a lasting legacy for our family. I thought my lifelong devotion would be met with respect and love when I reached my golden years. I was completely wrong. The brutal reality of Kendra's gratitude hit me on a busy Saturday morning. The salon was buzzing with my loyal clients and hard-working stylists. The front door swung open and Kendra marched in, not with a warm smile, but with a look of cold calculation. Right behind her was her husband Bradley, a white man who always looked at my salon like it was a charity project rather than a highly successful enterprise. Without a single word of greeting, Kendra walked right up to my styling station and slammed a cheap cardboard box onto the counter. The entire salon went dead silent. The clippers and conversations stopped. I looked at my daughter totally confused and asked her what she was doing. She looked me dead in the eye and announced loudly that I was simply too old and out of touch to run the business anymore. She said my time was up and I needed to pack my things. I felt the breath get knocked out of my lungs. Before I could even process the humiliation of my own flesh and blood disrespecting me in front of my community, Bradley stepped forward. He smugly slid a thick stack of papers onto my clean counter. It was a management transfer agreement. He leaned in and told me that I needed to sign the business over to them immediately. When I shook my head in disbelief, his arrogant smile turned into a nasty sneer. He threatened me right there in my own shop. He stated clearly that if I did not step aside quietly, they had already prepared legal documents to have me declared incompetent due to a declining mental state. My own daughter and her husband wanted to steal my life's work and throw me away like yesterday's trash. I did not start with a salon that took up half the block. 30 years ago, Crown and Glory was just me and a single rented chair in a cramped, poorly lit barbershop on the south side of Atlanta. I remember the ache in my feet that would shoot up my spine by the end of a 14-hour shift. I remember my fingers cramping so badly I had to soak them in warm water and Epsom salts just to hold a comb the next morning. But every time the physical pain felt like too much, I would look at a little photograph of my girl Kendra taped to my mirror. I wanted her to have the world. A world where she never had to sweep up hair clippings to pay her electric bill or worry about where her next meal was coming from. So I skipped lunches. I wore the same 3 pairs of slacks for 10 years, mending the hems late at night. I missed church picnics, family gatherings, and neighborhood block parties because I was always working, always pushing for that next dollar. Every dime I saved went straight into Kendra. She never knew what it was like to wear hand-me-downs or feel lacking. She went to school in pristine designer clothes, carrying the best backpacks, and she attended a top-tier university, fully paid for by the sweat of my brow. When she met Bradley, I even drained a massive chunk of my savings to pay for a lavish picture-perfect wedding because I wanted her to walk through life with her head held high. Over the decades, my single chair grew into a massive business. Crown and Glory became a sanctuary for the black women in our community. I became a mentor to young stylists who needed a chance and a confidant to doctors, lawyers, and teachers who sat in my chairs every week. People in Atlanta respected me. They came to me for advice, for prayer, and for the kind of wisdom you only get from surviving hard times and building something beautiful out of nothing. But Kendra did not see any of that. To her, I was just a tired old woman who smelled like hairspray and still balanced a checkbook by hand. She looked at my life's work not as a towering achievement, but as an embarrassing reminder of where she came from. She did not see the empire I built with my bare hands serving our people. She only saw a clueless, outdated lady she needed to hide from her wealthy new friends. The real shift in my daughter started the day she married Bradley. I tried to welcome him with open arms, giving him the respect a mother gives the man her daughter chooses. But Bradley was not the kind of man who understood family, and he certainly did not understand our culture. To him, the vibrant, historically black community where I built my salon was nothing more than an opportunity for ruthless gentrification. He was a commercial real estate developer who looked at our neighborhoods and only saw dollar signs, bulldozers, and overpriced coffee shops meant to push us out. It did not take long for his cold, calculating mindset to poison Kendra. Before long, Bradley started making these little backhanded comments whenever he dropped by to pick her up. He would look around my bustling, highly profitable business and call it my quaint little shop. He acted as if I was running a neighborhood lemonade stand instead of a premier salon that grossed top dollar and employed a dozen people. And Kendra just let him do it. In fact, she started chiming in. My own daughter became deeply embarrassed by my working-class roots. When she hosted dinners at their sleek new house, I was suddenly kept out of sight in the kitchen, or she would ask me to change my clothes so I would fit the aesthetic of her high society friends. She would roll her eyes when I talked about my clients acting like the very business that paid for her luxury lifestyle was a dirty little secret she had to endure. The disrespect cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever felt, but I kept my mouth shut. I swallowed every insult, every condescending smirk from Bradley, and every sigh of annoyance from the child I had sacrificed everything for. I did it because I desperately wanted to keep the peace. I told myself that she was just adjusting to her new marriage and her new social circle. I clung to the fading image of the sweet little girl who used to sit in my lap, wrap her little arms around my neck, and tell me I was the best mum in the world. I walked on eggshells in my own life, trying not to offend the daughter who was slowly treating me like a stranger. I thought my silence was an act of love, a way to protect our bond. I had no idea that while I was bending over backward to accommodate them, they were interpreting my patience as weakness. They saw a quiet, compliant old woman who would be incredibly easy to push out of the way. The ink on that management transfer agreement was barely dry before Bradley started acting like the supreme ruler of crown and glory. He and Kendra swooped in the very next Monday morning with clipboards, spreadsheets, and a contractor to measure my floors. I was standing at my station, the very spot where I had listened to 1,000 heartbreaks and joys over 30 years, when Bradley marched over and literally unplugged my hairdryer. He told me I needed to clear my counter because they were replacing my vintage mirrors with something he called minimalist and chic. Kendra stood right beside him, sipping a green juice, nodding along as if I had not bought the very shoes on her feet with the money made from those vintage mirrors. They stripped the warmth out of my shop day by day. The vibrant posters of beautiful black women that adorned my walls were taken down and replaced with stark, empty beige paint. The soulful music that kept our spirits high was switched off, replaced by some soulless, instrumental hum that sounded like a waiting room at a corporate dentist office. I tried to offer my guidance, I tried to show Kendra the appointment books and explain how I managed inventory, but she just waved her manicured hand at me. She said they were digitizing everything and that my old school methods were exactly why the salon was stagnating. My salon had a waiting list 3 months long, but to them it was just a broken-down relic. They treated me like a pesky intern who kept getting in the way of their grand vision. But the true heartbreak was watching them treat my community like garbage. Crown and Glory was a safe haven. Women came to me to get ready for their weddings, their first job interviews, and their babies' christenings. I knew their mothers and their grandmothers. But Bradley did not care about legacy or loyalty. He only cared about gentrification. He wanted to cater to the wealthy, trendy crowd that was slowly buying up the block and pushing our people out. Without even consulting me, Kendra doubled the prices overnight. She instituted a strict no-children policy and cancelled the senior discount I had offered every Tuesday since the 1990s. I had to stand by and watch as Miss Clara, a retired nurse who had been sitting in my chair for 25 years, walked in for her regular wash, and set only to be told by Bradley that her appointment had been bumped for a premium client. He handed her a newly printed price list and smirked, telling her she might want to look for a cheaper place down the street. I felt the heat rise in my chest, a burning fury I had to physically swallow down. I ran out to the sidewalk to apologize to Miss Clara, but the damage was done. Day after day, the women who had funded Kendra's Ivy League education were turned away at the door. Kendra told me we needed to elevate our brand completely blind to the fact that she was tearing down the very foundation of our success. The absolute lowest point of my life came on a Friday afternoon a few weeks into their takeover. The salon was packed with their new affluent clientele, women who did not know my name and did not care to learn it. I was sweeping up hair near the front registers, just trying to be useful in the place I had built with my own 2 hands. Kendra walked over, grabbed my arm tightly, and pulled me into the back hallway. She looked me up and down with utter disgust. She told me that my presence on the floor was confusing the new customers. She said I looked too tired, too old-fashioned, and that I was completely ruining the new high-end aesthetic they were trying to cultivate. She actually pointed her finger at the cramped, windowless break room in the back and told me to stay in there until closing time. She said I could fold towels if I really needed something to do. My own flesh and blood hid me away in a closet because the sight of my aging, hard-working black body was an embarrassment to her new gentrified world. I sat in that dark break room, surrounded by damp towels and the smell of bleach, listening to the muffled voices of strangers taking over my life's work. I swallowed my pride day after day because I was terrified of losing my daughter forever. I endured the agonizing humiliation of being a ghost in my own kingdom. But sitting in that cramped room, wiping tears of profound betrayal from my wrinkled cheeks, a quiet, cold realization began to take root in my soul. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when the truth finally slapped me awake. Long after the last stylist had gone home and the hum of the blow dryers had faded into silence, I stayed behind. Kendra and Bradley had explicitly told me to leave the cleaning to a late-night crew they claimed to have hired, but 30 years of habit are not so easily broken. I grabbed my trusty broom and began sweeping the floors, picking up the fallen hair and discarded foil wraps. The salon was my sanctuary. Even with the sterile beige paint they had slapped over my beautiful walls, the very bones of the building felt like an extension of my own soul. As I walked behind the reception desk to empty the trash bin, a sudden flash of light caught my eye. There, sitting right next to the cash register, was Bradley's silver tablet. He was always glued to that thing, tapping away while ignoring the clients. In his rush to beat the evening traffic, he had left it behind, and the screen was wide open, glowing brightly in the dim salon. I never was a snooping woman. I believed in respecting privacy. But as I reached over to press the power button and turn the screen off, a notification popped up at the top. The subject line read, "Crown and Glory Liquidation Timeline." The word liquidation made my blood run cold. My hand hovered over the glass screen, trembling slightly. Before I could talk myself out of it, I tapped the notification. What opened up was a long, detailed email thread that shattered my heart into a million irreparable pieces. The emails were between Bradley Kendra and a ruthless corporate development firm known for bulldozing historic black neighborhoods in Atlanta. I stood there in the quiet dark, reading words that felt like physical blows to my chest. They did not want to run my salon. They never wanted to elevate my brand or bring in a high-end clientele. The entire rebranding effort was a calculated farce. Their true intention was to deliberately drive my business straight into the ground. The emails outlined their strategy with terrifying precision. Step 1 was alienating my loyal customer base by doubling prices and enforcing ridiculous policies, which I had already watched them do. Step 2 was bleeding the business dry by racking up massive debt under the salon's name, buying unnecessary luxury equipment, and expensing their personal dinners and trips. Step 3 was the final blow. They planned to leverage that fraudulent management transfer agreement to officially declare the salon bankrupt. Once the business was legally ruined, they intended to liquidate every single asset from the styling chairs to the shampoo bowls and hand the prime commercial lease over to the developers. In exchange, Bradley and Kendra were promised a massive multi-million-dollar payout. I read paragraphs where Bradley bragged to the developers about how easily he had manipulated the situation. He called me a gullible old woman who had no idea what her location was actually worth. He joked that I was so desperate for my daughter's love that I would hand over a gold mine for a simple hug. But the absolute worst part was not Bradley's arrogant cruelty. It was Kendra's complicity. I scrolled further down the thread and found messages written by my own flesh and blood. The child I had carried for 9 months. The daughter whose college tuition I had paid in full by standing on my aching feet day after day. Kendra had written a detailed message outlining exactly what they would do with the payout money. She sent the developers links to a multi-million-dollar luxury estate in a gated, all-white community. She talked about buying brand new imported cars and taking a month-long vacation to Italy to celebrate their massive windfall. And then at the very bottom of the email, the developer asked a simple question. What are you planning to do with your mother once the business is shut down and she loses her income? Kendra's response was a knife twisted directly into my spine. She wrote that she had already researched state-funded low-income care facilities on the outskirts of the city. She said that because I would have no assets and no income, I would easily qualify for government assistance. She actually typed the words, "My mother is getting too old to handle reality anyway, so putting her in a cheap facility is the most practical solution. We just need to get her declared incompetent, and we can wash our hands of the whole mess." I dropped the device onto the desk. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly wicked, that I could not even cry. There were no tears left in me. I felt a cold, suffocating darkness wrap around my throat. I had spent my entire life breaking my back to make sure Kendra never had to struggle, and her ultimate plan was to strip me of my legacy, steal my life's work, and lock me away in a dismal, underfunded facility to rot. She was perfectly willing to destroy my entire existence just to buy a bigger house and a fancy car. I sat on that cold linoleum floor for what felt like hours, letting the devastating reality of my daughter's greed wash over me. But slowly, the crushing heartbreak began to solidify into something else. The grief hardened into a sharp, crystalline fury. I thought they had me cornered. They truly believed I was just a naive, uneducated woman who only knew how to hot comb hair. They thought my silence was submission and my patience was stupidity. I stood up, feeling a new, unshakable power surging through my veins. I picked up my phone, took clear, high-quality photographs of every single email, every attachment, and every malicious message. I made sure the dates, the names, and the intent were perfectly captured. Then I carefully placed the tablet exactly where Bradley had left it, making sure it looked entirely untouched. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had won. But they had made one catastrophic, irreversible mistake. They forgot who actually held the keys to the kingdom. I sat on that cold floor until the chill seeped deep into my bones, replacing the crippling sorrow with an icy, undeniable clarity. For 30 years, my hands had been stained with dye, and my feet numb with exhaustion, all to shield Kendra from the harsh realities of the world. I had willingly played the role of the humble, submissive mother, because I thought my humility bought her happiness. I thought my silence meant peace. But as I wiped the last stray tear from my cheek, a profound realization washed over me. I was not just a grieving mother. I was a businesswoman. I built crown and glory from a single raggedy chair into an institution. I navigated recessions, negotiated commercial leases, and outsmarted suppliers who tried to nickel and dime a black woman trying to make her way in Atlanta. The woman who built this empire did not cower in a windowless break room, and she certainly did not let entitled, greedy children steal her crown. I felt my spine straighten. The heavy, suffocating weight in my chest dissolved, replaced by a fierce, protective fire. They had mistaken my maternal grace for foolishness. They had looked at my silver hair and assumed my mind was gone. But they were about to find out that the same hands that delicately braided my daughter's hair could also dismantle her entire fraudulent scheme without breaking a sweat. I took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scents of hairspray essential oils and the faint, lingering smell of coffee from the morning rush. This air belonged to me. This space belonged to me. I had nurtured this community hub, and I refused to let it be bulldozed to fund a luxury vacation for two ungrateful thieves. I stood up. My knees popped in the quiet salon, but my hands were no longer shaking. I walked back over to the reception desk where Bradley had so carelessly left his tablet. He was so arrogant, so entirely convinced of his own superiority, that he never even bothered to put a passcode on the device. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the camera app, making sure the flash was turned off, so no sudden light would draw attention from the street outside. With steady, deliberate movements, I scrolled through the entire email thread again. I photographed every single message. I captured the dates the sender addresses and the specific monetary figures they discussed. I made sure the lighting was perfect, ensuring every word was legible and undeniable. I took pictures of the attachments, zooming in on the commercial redevelopment plans, the projected profit margins, and the state facility brochures Kendra had so callously forwarded. Every tap on my screen was a promise to myself. Every click of my camera felt like loading a weapon. I was meticulously collecting the ammunition I needed to defend my life's work and my dignity. Once I had a clear, high-quality image of every damning piece of evidence, I closed the email application. I pressed the power button to turn off the screen, then nudged the tablet precisely back to the exact spot where Bradley had dropped it next to the register. I wiped the glass clean with my sleeve to remove any trace of my fingerprints. It looked completely untouched. Looking around my dark salon, the shadows felt different now. They no longer felt oppressive. They felt like allies. I walked past the empty styling stations, tracing my fingers along the back of the leather chairs I had purchased with my own hard-earned cash. A bitter truth settled deep into my spirit. Kendra did not love me. She loved what I could provide. Her affection was a transaction, a well-rehearsed performance designed to keep the bank of Mom open for business. The minute she married a man who promised her a shortcut to wealth, I ceased to be her mother. I became an obstacle. I became a walking, breathing piggy bank they thought they could just crack open and discard. But they had miscalculated terribly. They thought I was just renting this space. They thought my power ended at the salon door. I grabbed my purse and my keys, walking out into the humid Atlanta night. I locked the front door behind me, hearing the heavy click of the deadbolt echo in the quiet street. I felt a calm, deadly determination settle over my soul. I was not going to cry anymore. I was not going to mourn the illusion of the daughter I thought I had. I was going to prepare for war. I was going to let them play their little game a little while longer. I was going to let them strut around the salon, rack up their debts, and plan their luxury vacations. I would give them enough rope to hang their own schemes, but when the time was right, I was going to pull the floor out from under them. I resolved right then and there to teach my daughter and her husband a devastating lesson they would never ever forget. They wanted a business transaction, so a business transaction is exactly what they were going to get. The morning after I discovered Bradley's tablet, I did not go to the salon. I called out sick. I told Kendra my arthritis was acting up, keeping my voice shaky. She told me to take the whole week off and sounded thrilled about it. But I was not resting in bed with a heating pad. I put on my best tailored suit, the one for bank meetings, and I drove downtown to the financial district. I took the elevator up to the 40th floor of a glass skyscraper to see a man named Arthur Sterling. Mr. Sterling was not just a lawyer, he was a shark in a sharp three-piece suit, a high-powered corporate attorney who navigated vicious business disputes. But to me, he was just Arthur, the man whose mother used to be my very first regular client, back when I only had a single chair. I had cut his hair when he was a teenager. He knew the blood and sweat that went into Crown and Glory. When I walked into his corner office, he took one look at my face and told his secretary to hold all his calls for the rest of the day. I sat down in one of his leather chairs and placed my phone on his desk. I did not cry. I did not shake. I just opened the photo gallery and let him swipe through the pictures of Bradley's tablet. I watched Arthur's eyes narrow as he read the emails between my daughter, my son-in-law, and the commercial developers. I watched his jaw tighten as he read Kendra's messages about sticking me in a low-income state-funded care facility. When he finally put the phone down, the silence in the room was heavy enough to crush stone. He looked at me with a mixture of profound sorrow and rage. He asked me what I wanted to do. He told me we could file an injunction immediately to halt the management transfer and protect the salon. But I shook my head. I did not want an injunction. I wanted annihilation. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. I slid it across the desk toward him. Kendra and Bradley had spent the last few weeks acting like they were the masters of the universe, because they had bullied me into signing a management transfer agreement. They thought they controlled Crown and Glory because they controlled the daily operations and the bank accounts. They assumed, just like the commercial developers assumed, that I was just a tired old woman renting a commercial space on a month-to-month lease. What none of them knew, what I had kept an absolute secret from everyone, including my own daughter, was the contents of that weathered folder. 15 years ago, when our neighborhood first started showing the signs of gentrification, the original landlord of our block suddenly decided to sell the property. I looked around, and I saw the clear writing on the wall. I knew that if I did not secure my ground, we would eventually be completely priced out of our own community. So I took every single penny of my life savings, took out a massive commercial loan, and I bought the building. I bought not just the salon space, but the entire 3-story commercial building. But I did not buy it under the name Beatrice. I had quietly created an anonymous limited liability company to make the massive purchase, keeping my name completely off the public records to protect my hard-earned assets. Arthur opened the folder and meticulously reviewed the original deed, the mortgage payoff statements from 5 years ago, and the corporate formation documents. I owned the brick. I owned the mortar. I owned the roof over their heads. The management transfer agreement gave them control of the Salon business entity, but it did not give them the lease to the building itself. The business was just a tenant, and I was the landlord. Arthur let out a low whistle, a smile breaking through his serious professional demeanor. He told me that my foresight was brilliant, We spent the next 5 hours building an airtight legal arsenal. Arthur called in two of his top junior partners to assist us. We scrutinized the management transfer agreement that Bradley had forced me to sign under the threat of a mental incompetency petition. Arthur pointed out that because they had threatened me with a fraudulent legal action to force my signature, the contract was signed under extreme duress. But more importantly, we had the photographed emails proving fraudulent misrepresentation. They had presented the agreement as a way to help me elevate the brand, while secretly conspiring to bankrupt the business and liquidate the assets. This was textbook corporate fraud. Arthur drafted a series of legal notices that would strike like lightning when the time was right. We drew up a formal notice of lease termination for the Salon business. We drafted a massive lawsuit for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and elder financial abuse. Arthur warned me that the next few weeks would be the hardest of my life. He told me I had to go back into that salon and play the part of the defeated, clueless old woman flawlessly. I had to let them think their malicious plan was working perfectly. I had to smile while they destroyed the business on paper. I looked Arthur straight in the eye and told him I had 30 years of practice smiling at people who looked down on me. I was completely ready. He instructed me to let them rack up whatever debt they wanted, as long as it was strictly in their names. I gave him full access to my personal accounts to shield them from Bradley. I walked out of that skyscraper feeling a cold, sharp clarity. I was no longer a victim. I was now the architect of my own justice, completely ready. When I returned to the salon the following Monday, I gave the greatest performance of my entire life. I walked through the front glass doors with my shoulders hunched, my gaze lowered to the floor and my steps slow and purposefully heavy. I shuffled over to the dark, cramped break room, just as Kendra had ordered me to do weeks prior. I grabbed a stack of damp towels and sat in the corner, quietly folding them one by one. Bradley and Kendra barely glanced my way. To them, I was exactly what they wanted me to be, a broken, compliant old woman who had finally accepted her tragic place in the shadows. I watched them from the doorway of the break room, silently observing as they happily dug their own financial graves. They were wildly and recklessly overspending on absolutely everything. Bradley had completely convinced Kendra that the commercial developers were going to hand them a massive multi-million-dollar payout the exact moment the business was legally bankrupt. Operating under the absolute delusion of this guaranteed windfall, they treated the salon's fragile finances like an endless personal piggy bank. I watched the delivery men wheel in ridiculously expensive new espresso machines. I watched them unbox imported Italian leather waiting chairs and high-end styling products that none of our actual demographic would ever buy. They swiped the company credit cards with absolute abandon. When the business accounts started running dry due to their terrible management and the rapid loss of our regular customers, Bradley confidently applied for massive lines of credit. Because he was the legal manager of the business entity, now his signature was on every single debt. They were personally guaranteeing loans to fund a lavish lifestyle, taking weekend trips to Miami and buying designer watches, all charged directly to the salon's dwindling credit. They foolishly assumed the developer payout would wipe the slate clean. They were so blinded by their own greed that they never bothered to read the fine print of the commercial lease they were supposedly operating under. While they were busy bankrupting the ground floor, I was quietly orchestrating a massive relocation right above their heads. As the owner of the entire building, I had always maintained the second-floor suite as an open, unused space. Over the years, I had slowly renovated it, updating the old plumbing and installing beautiful, wide, energy-efficient windows. These windows let in the gorgeous Atlanta sunlight. It was originally meant to be an expansion for Crown and Glory, a dream I had put on hold when my arthritis got too bad. Now it was our ultimate salvation. I patiently waited until Bradley and Kendra left for their long, luxurious 2-hour lunches. During those windows, I began pulling my loyal stylists aside one by one. These were talented women. I had personally trained women who respected me and who were currently miserable under Bradley's tyrannical, clueless management. I carefully brought them up the back stairwell to the second floor. I showed them the sprawling, sunlit suite with its brand new washing stations and gleaming mirrors. I explained the entire truth. I told them about the management transfer agreement, the gentrification plot, and the fact that I was the actual landlord of the building. The sheer shock on their faces quickly turned into fierce, unwavering loyalty. They were disgusted by Kendra's betrayal and Bradley's arrogance. Together, we formulated a brilliant, silent exodus. My loyal stylists discreetly began contacting our long-time, loyal black clientele. The very women Kendra and Bradley had turned away at the door just weeks prior. Miss Clara, the sweet retired nurse, was the first one we called. My girls explained that Mama Beatrice was opening an exclusive private studio on the second floor by invite only. Word spread through our community like wildfire, but it remained an absolute ironclad secret from the ground floor. My wonderful clients knew exactly how to protect their own. Every single day, the ground floor salon grew emptier and noticeably quieter. The wealthy gentrifiers Bradley hoped to attract never materialized because they preferred the established luxury spots downtown. Kendra would stand by the empty reception desk, scrolling on her phone, complaining about how the neighborhood was just too stubborn to appreciate their elevated brand. Meanwhile, right above her head, the second floor was vibrating with life. We had music playing, laughter ringing out, and a steady stream of our beautiful, loyal clients coming up the back alley staircase. We secretly operated an entirely separate, booming business right under their noses. I had officially registered the new salon under a different name, safely and completely shielded by my anonymous limited liability company. The talented stylists were making much more money than ever before, and I was finally back behind the chair. My heart was full. It was poetic justice knowing my loyal community refused to let my legacy be erased. I occasionally walked downstairs carrying folded towels just to keep up the charade. Bradley would scoff, telling me to mop the entryway before I left. I would just nod, keep my eyes cast down, and quietly say, "Yes, sir." I watched him stress over the mounting pile of final notice bills on the reception desk. The credit card companies were calling constantly, leaving aggressive voicemails. The equipment suppliers were demanding immediate payment. Their fraudulent scheme to bankrupt the business was working entirely too well, but the severe financial ruin was falling squarely onto their own shoulders. They had no revenue, maxed out credit, and a towering mountain of personal liability. And the commercial developers were getting increasingly impatient, aggressively demanding the empty building they had been promised. I secretly smiled into the damp, bleach-scented towels I was holding in my hands. The legal trap was set. The jaws were primed, and my ungrateful daughter was about to step right into it. I knew that when the hammer finally fell, the destruction of their arrogant empire would be absolute and undeniable. The evening of the grand relaunch and signing party arrived with a suffocating wave of arrogance that spilled out onto the Atlanta sidewalk. Bradley and Kendra had pulled out all the stops to impress the commercial developers, treating the event like a royal coronation rather than the funeral of my life's work. Through the large front windows, I could see that my vibrant, beloved salon had been completely stripped of its soul and transformed into a sterile, modern lounge. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of champagne and caviar. While a string quartet played softly in the corner, Bradley had spared no expense, sinking himself even deeper into massive credit card debt to rent crystal chandeliers and imported floral centerpieces. He was standing near the reception desk, wearing a ridiculously expensive tuxedo, laughing loudly and shaking hands with the corporate executives who were practically salivating over the prime real estate. Kendra was right by his side, draped in a designer gown she absolutely could not afford. beaming as if she had personally built the empire they were currently standing in. They were celebrating their impending multi-million-dollar payout, thoroughly convinced that their malicious scheme was hours away from absolute success. They thought I was sitting at home in the dark, weeping over my lost business. They were completely wrong. I did not arrive wearing my usual faded smock, or the comfortable orthopedic shoes that had carried me through 30 years of grueling labor. I stepped out of my vehicle wearing a stunning, meticulously tailored crimson suit that hugged my shoulders with absolute authority. My hair, usually pulled back into a hasty practical bun, was styled flawlessly. I wore the vintage gold jewelry my late mother had passed down to me, pieces I had kept locked away for decades. I did not look like a tired, clueless old woman who was ready to be pushed into a state-funded care facility. I looked like a queen coming to reclaim her throne. As I pushed open the heavy glass doors, the sharp click of my heels echoed over the polite chatter and the classical music. I walked into that room with my head held high, exuding an absolute, unshakable power that instantly commanded the attention of every single person present. The conversations closest to the door abruptly died down. Heads turned. The executives stared at me with immense curiosity. It only took a few seconds for Bradley to spot me from across the room. I watched the smug, victorious smile melt right off his face, replaced instantly by a deep, ugly scowl of pure annoyance. He muttered something under his breath to Kendra, who turned and physically recoiled when she saw me standing there in my crimson suit. I did not wait for them to come to me. I walked straight toward the center of the room, my gaze fixed entirely on the man who thought he could steal my legacy. Bradley aggressively pushed his way through the crowd of wealthy developers, marching toward me with his chest puffed out, fully intending to intimidate me into submission. He stopped, inches from my face, leaning down so only I could hear the venom in his voice. He demanded to know what I was doing there, his face turning a blotchy shade of furious red. He told me I was not invited, that I was completely ruining the aesthetic of their corporate event, and that I needed to turn around and walk out the door, before he had me forcibly removed by security. I did not flinch or take a single step backward. I just smiled, a cold, sharp smile that finally made a flicker of genuine hesitation cross his arrogant eyes. Before I could even answer, Bradley decided to humiliate me publicly to save face before his wealthy guests. He raised his voice, ensuring that the developers and the executives could hear every single cruel word. He announced to the room that this was a tragic misunderstanding, claiming that I was his poor, senile mother-in-law who frequently wandered out of her house confused. He reached out and grabbed my arm tightly, trying to forcefully escort me toward the exit, treating me like a pest that needed to be exterminated. Kendra stepped forward, playing the role of the embarrassed, sympathetic daughter perfectly. She apologized to the executives, loudly stating that my mental decline had been devastating for their family, and that they were finalizing the paperwork to have me committed for my own safety. They stood there mocking me in my own house, laughing at my supposed incompetence while the developers watched with uncomfortable pity. They thought they were nailing the coffin shut on my life. But I just stood there waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I calmly pulled my arm out of Bradley's grip and raised my hand, giving a sharp signal toward the front entrance. The heavy glass doors swung open and the entire room fell into a stunned silence. Mr. Sterling walked in, wearing his sharpest charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Flanking him were two uniformed local police officers, their hands resting comfortably on their belts. They marched directly toward the center of the room, parting the sea of wealthy developers. Bradley's face drained of all color, his arrogant sneer replaced by genuine panic as the officers stopped right in front of him. He stammered, demanding to know why the police were interrupting his corporate event. I stepped forward, my voice ringing out clear and unyielding. commanding the absolute attention of every single person. I turned to the commercial developers, who were standing near the reception desk, waiting to finalize their lucrative buyout. I looked them dead in the eye and publicly dropped the bombshell that would obliterate Bradley and Kendra's entire reality. I announced with crystalline clarity that I was not a tenant. I informed them that 15 years ago, I quietly purchased this commercial building under an anonymous, limited liability company. I was the sole owner of the brick, the mortar, and the ground they were standing on. I stated firmly that the salon space could not be sold, liquidated, or redeveloped without my explicit signature, a signature they would never receive. The developers gasped, exchanging horrified glances. Bradley's jaw practically hit the floor, and Kendra let out a strangled noise, finally understanding the catastrophic magnitude of their miscalculation. They had tried to steal a business that was completely useless without the building. Before Bradley could formulate a sentence, Mr. Sterling stepped forward with professional precision. He pulled a stack of legally binding documents from his briefcase and handed Bradley and Kendra formal immediate eviction notices for the business space. Mr. Sterling announced loudly that the salon business currently under Bradley's management was in severe breach of its commercial lease due to gross negligence and thousands of dollars in deliberately unpaid rent. He stated that their legal right to occupy the premises was terminated effectively immediately, and the police officers were present to ensure they vacated the property without causing damage. Kendra began to openly weep, screaming that they were legally entitled to the developer payout. But her cries fell on deaf ears. I was not finished. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick stack of high-resolution printed photographs. They were the emails I meticulously captured from Bradley's unlocked tablet. I walked straight over to the lead commercial developer and handed him the stack. I watched the executive's eyes widen in absolute disgust as he read the messages exposing their deliberate fraud, their plan to purposefully bankrupt the business, and Kendra's chilling desire to throw her mother into a state-funded care facility just to buy a luxury car. The developer threw the papers onto the floor in utter revulsion. He looked at Bradley with pure contempt, announcing clearly that his firm did not do business with criminals and the deal was permanently dead. He signaled to his associates, and within seconds, the wealthy executives marched out the door. Bradley and Kendra were left completely alone in the center of the ruined salon, surrounded by the expensive imported crystal chandeliers and the catered caviar they could not afford. The wealthy developers were gone. The massive payout they expected was permanently erased. Because Bradley had recklessly signed for all the luxury upgrades and exorbitant business loans under his own name during his arrogant tenure as manager. They were now personally drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of inescapable crushing debt. They had no business, no lease, and absolutely no way out. The two police officers firmly instructed them to gather their things and exit my building immediately. I stood perfectly still in my beautiful crimson suit, watching my ungrateful daughter and her wicked husband slowly walk out into the freezing cold Atlanta night with absolutely nothing. They had tried to bury me completely unaware that I was the one who actually owned the very ground in the weeks that followed. That glorious night, the reality of their wicked choices crashed down on Kendra and Bradley like a heavy concrete wall. Without the salon to use as their personal piggy bank, and with the angry commercial developers threatening them with severe legal action for breach of contract, their lavish lifestyle completely evaporated overnight. The imported luxury cars were repossessed right out of their driveway. The bank quickly foreclosed on their sleek modern home because they could not make the massive monthly mortgage payments. They were drowning in a sea of inescapable debt. Kendra actually had the absolute audacity to show up at my front door one rainy afternoon, weeping and begging for financial salvation. She pleaded with me to pay off their massive loans, claiming we were blood, and that a mother should always protect her child. But I looked at her with a heart that had finally healed from its blind devotion. I told her I had already given her everything I had, and she chose to throw it away. I closed my heavy wooden door, and I did not open it again. I refused to ever let my hard-earned peace and my lasting legacy be compromised by their insatiable greed. They had to learn the harsh, painful lesson that actions have permanent consequences. Meanwhile, my life blossomed in ways I never thought possible. I officially reopened the new Crown and Glory in the gorgeous sunlit upper suite of my building. The new space was a total triumph, vibrating with joy and the soulful music we all missed so much. My loyal stylists returned with renewed passion, and my beautiful clients filled the chairs, bringing life and laughter back into my days. I was no longer a ghost, hidden away in a dark break room. I was the proud owner of a thriving empire surrounded by genuine love, loyalty, and a community that respected my journey. I finally found my true family in wonderful, loyal women who bravely stood by my side when my own flesh and blood tried to violently tear me down forever. It took losing everything to realize exactly what I truly deserved. As loving mothers, we are constantly conditioned to pour our souls into our children, even when they take us for granted. But I am here to firmly tell you that your lifelong sacrifice does not make you a doormat. Knowing your worth is the absolute greatest inheritance you can leave. You must fiercely protect your legacy, because true family is always built on mutual respect, not cold entitlement. Never let anyone convince you your golden years are over just because they want to steal what is yours. If you have ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated your strength, let me know in the comments. Do not forget to like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of truth and triumph. And tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there.